Hello, hello. What's going on? I'm Benny Matthews. This is Footy Rants. We're into the round 21 preview for the NRL Telstra Premiership season. Just a few little housekeeping things. For some reason, we've finally been caught out a little bit on YouTube as far as the copyright goes for video highlights in the review system. Not too sure how I'm going to get around it, but I'm just going to have a little crack, keep the editing a little bit tighter next week and see if we can't keep sneaking through this system, so to speak. So wait with bated breath on that. Otherwise, we may have to have a look at a bit of a reformatting of this process. But I think everything review-wise, as far as using the NRL website, is fine in what we're doing now. So can't see us having any troubles in getting this podcast out there. So yeah, please do bear with me. I apologise that the audio didn't get put up. I'll look for ways around that and still providing that service at worst case. Okay, that aside, let's move forward. Look at the games this weekend, and it gets harder and harder to tip every week in this competition. We're getting down to crunch time, and you're almost in the habit of saying it every week now that every game's a must win, and it seems like such a cliche thing to say. Like, of course, every game's a must win. You just got to go out there, and that's what you're striving to do week in, week out. But yeah, there's a number of games across the weekend that I'm waiting with bated breath for. Just because there's those little chunks like we've been talking about for the race for the top four, and then the race for those couple of teams to desperately try and sneak in those 7th and 8th positions. So yeah, the games that are on this weekend still very much influence that outcome at both those different points in the ladder. So we move to the first game, Penrith Bulldogs tonight at Pepper Stadium. We have a look at a couple of the changes, key changes here. So Matt Moylan is out now with that hamstring injury. I believe it's a lot more serious than what they first thought, and he won't be back until the last round. So the youngster in Tyrone May will definitely look to build on his experience now and settle into that 6 role, at least for the next month or so. And we've seen last time out that May and Cleary worked seamlessly. I'm pretty sure it was against the Warriors that they ended up touching up. So from that respect, I'm not too phased with that change. I think they'll do a bang-up job. Dylan Edwards has been outstanding at one, particularly defensively for a younger, smaller guy as well. And we also see another big in for Penrith there is Bryce Cartwright. He hasn't been named in the 17 as of yet. We see him down he's named at 18th man. So potentially, just to cover their ass around Tyrone May, we know that Cartwright can play 6 and does have that ability to play 6. That he may find himself on the bench there somewhere. But in saying that, I guess they do have Sione Katoa coming off the bench at 9 for Peter Wallace. So worst case, if anything did happen there, Wallace could slot into the halves and Katoa would just play the game out at 9. So perhaps they will just leave that for the time being. James Fisher-Harris is slowly working his way back to first grade form. Probably should have scored a try last week. Just sort of greasing that groove at that new pace, hitting those lines with the late ball. Obviously completely different story to reserve grade. But yeah, once again, I'll say it again, I love this Penrith forward pack, especially the youth that's in it. Moses Leota gets his second chance to start at lock with Trent Merrin not expected back until next week. But yeah, the Bulldogs, they've got their captain James Graham back, so it'll be interesting to see what sort of dynamic and just those pure leadership qualities and desire to win that he brings back to the side, and how much that does influence their performance. Last start out against these two sides saw Penrith win emphatically, 38 points to 0. They've also had a pretty handy winning record against the Dogs of late, winning 6 of their last 9 starts. So for me, that's big pluses in the books for Penrith, especially because Tyrone May has sort of come in as a youngster. One thing that impressed me most about him was his ability to take on the line, and even being a smaller guy, I definitely wasn't afraid to do so. And I think just helping get on the front foot on that left edge just gave Cleary the confidence just to roam around that middle and then play off to his right edge. And when you've got the finishing capabilities of someone like a Dalamatine Zelezniak, who's scored 5 tries in the last 6 starts at home, that definitely sits well with me. So for this match, I think the Dogs it's just a case of, it's been too little too late to move Moses Mbai to 9. I like what he has done since then. It's hard to know where Josh Reynolds' head's at now. He got caught up in that little bit of an incident after the game the other week at a bar, and it's just interesting to know what the dynamics are. We've got Des Hasler coming under pressure, even though he re-signed earlier in the season. What's going to happen there? So I think it's just a lot of shit's happening behind closed doors that we're obviously not privy to, and I think that will weigh into this match to a certain degree. So yeah, I think the Panthers, they've got the potential to go on, win well. Whether they win 38-0, they've got the attacking flair versus the Bulldogs' defence, but defence hasn't been the issue. It's been scoring the points, which has been the problem all season. So unless they can turn that around, I think it could be a bit of a long night for the Dogs. But yeah, you just don't know. But yeah, I think it's going to be a Panthers win regardless. Second game, so Friday night, Warriors' second Friday night game in a row. It'd have to be the first time in a long time that's occurred, I would imagine. So they come up against the Cronulla Sharks, who are the favourites. We see there $1.62 into $2.35. So the Warriors outsiders at their home ground. They remain unchanged from their last start against the Cowboys last weekend. And to be fair, I think $2.35 is pretty handy odds head to head. I felt as though they were pretty impressive against the Cowboys last week. The 24-12 scoreline definitely didn't represent the performance. It was clearly 18-12 right up until the death there, and they had an attacking set which could have potentially taken the game to extra time. Bit of a mistimed pass. Javid Bowen takes the ball, runs the length, and seals the deal for the Cowboys. Pretty similar sort of matchup in the sense that Cronulla are without James Maloney. We sort of scroll down. So yeah, as I said, Warriors unchanged. We head down to the Sharkies. The only change, big change, James Maloney. We've seen last time that he was absent, the Titans destroyed him 30 points to 10. Where I think the difference is going to lie this time, though, is they're not resorting to Jack Bird going to 6. They're leaving him out. Obviously, that was a massive defensive fuck-up putting him there last time. And that was pretty much where all the points were leaked. Ash Taylor just had an absolute field day against him. So Moo Brown comes in there at 6. And, this is the hardest combination that got them the results through the origin period when Maloney wasn't there anyway. So I think that's the way to go. Jack Bird will settle in nicely in his return, so he's obviously another big plus. So they've got James Seguiaro there, and I believe Joseph Paulu. He's been named in the reserve, so it'll just be, I guess, a flip of the coin on whether or not they want to just push Seguiaro to play the 80, and I think he will. He's played enough football now that even though he's only a couple games back in since injury, I believe it was a broken arm again that was keeping him out. So running meters still would have been able to been attained, so I can't see that being an issue. I really like the bench as well. Bakuya Hyington, Kurt Capewell, who's been in red hot form for him, slots back to the bench, and Jeremy Lattimore, who's got a wealth of experience. So yeah, I think where this game will be won and lost again, much as last week, just the forwards. We've seen Hess and Taumalolo would have been at the top of their tip sheets as far as the forward pack goes for the Warriors, and they were the two players who ran for the most meters. So when you're coming up against the likes of a Fafita, Luke Lewis, Wade Graham, Paul Gallen, big meter eaters, can play, especially late second phase play, looking for those offloads, I really think that's going to be the difference. I think they'll go with them for the majority of the game, but I think the absence of Maloney won't play as big of effect simply because of that selection of Brown at 6 and leaving Jack Bird at 3 in the centres. So yeah, for me, it's going to be the Sharkies, but in a bit closer terms than a lot of people would expect. I think it's still going to be tight. 7. Sharks have won 7 of the last 9 against the Warriors, and 5 of the last 6 have been by 4 points and less. So I think that's going to maintain that sort of winning fashion for the Sharks in a close one. So Sharkies 1-12 for me. Eels Broncos. So Parramatta come up against the only top 4 side, the only top 8, I beg your pardon, side that they'll play in the back end of this season. So they will play the Broncos again before the season is out. See head to head, Parramatta $2.78 into the Broncos $1.47, and there's a reason for that. Clint Gutherson, big one there we see in the red. Whilst there is a couple of pluses in that, You see Penny Terapo's thereabouts for selection as well, as is David Gower. But yeah, that's the biggest omission for me. I think we're really going to see how much of an influence Clint Gutherson's had on the winning ability of this team. They come off the back of 4 in a row, won 6 of their last 7. But last week I felt a 1-point victory against the Tigers, 17 errors. Yes, I guess you give them a pat on the back that the error rate was so high they still managed to get the 2 points. 2 points is 2 points when you're trying to fight your way into the top 8. But it shouldn't have even been a question. They should have wiped the floor of the Tigers. They should have walked all over them with the form that they have and the strike power that they have. Particularly the platform that Vave and Nathan Brown have been laying up the middle early on, and the combination of Norman Moses starting to figure itself out, and the finishes of French and Radradra on the ends. They should have been getting a little bit more footy. Yes, they both did score a try, but they should have scored more. So we look down to the Broncos side, and the biggest plus, Darius Boyd. So you've got a highly influential number 1 in Clint Gutherson out the back door, highly influential number 1 in Darius Boyd coming back in. Again, wouldn't have lost too much of a step with a hand injury, Darius Boyd, so he'll be fighting fit, ready to go. James Roberts is starting to play into some form, finishing really well, just utilising his key attribute in speed at moments when the Broncos most need it. And after a big win against the Bulldogs last week, I think we're really going to see the cogs start to wind up, and we're going to see what the Broncos are going to bring to this premiership market in this back end of the season. A lot of continuity starting to assemble for the Broncos in that forward pack, and that's always really important within that first 20-minute battle up front. And we're still seeing this experimental toing and froing of the halves and this reserve half as well. So they've named, as far as we're aware at the moment, in the starting 17, Milford and Hunt will start. Marshall has been named on the bench with Cody Nikorima missing out. He has been named number 18, but I doubt they'd carry him as 18th man unless there's some sort of injury concern that we're not aware of, or perhaps that Milford shoulder niggle might be there and they're just covering their ass from that respect. They're sticking with Pangai Jr. and Joe Offengowie off the bench. That's their forward subs. So Assesi and Arrow miss out and will go back to their respective Queensland Cup sides. Just that continuity and that spark last week, add on top of the fact that Darius Boyd's back in the fray. I also think that you add Broncos haven't lost in Sydney to Parramatta since 2013, so they've actually got a better winning record against Parramatta away than they do at home. So it's a bit of an inverse relationship with these two clubs. Boyd, Gutherson, that's the big key switch, and I think the Broncos are going to win 13+. So that's my tip for that one. Knights Dragons. Well, it's been a real tough season for Newcastle, to say the least. They've been in the mix in a lot of games of late, but 8 losses in a row is 8 losses in a row. And the Dragons last week, I think, just may have played themselves in a little bit of form that's just going to help propel them into this 8. I think they'll hold their position there. Last time that these two clubs came together, you might remember, Newcastle Knights actually held a 28-10 lead at halftime and blew it, lost 32-28. Big second half romping with the Dragons. For me, the key differences, and there's been little to no changes for Newcastle, just for information. So the only changes, we have Chanel Matadia, who was concussed severely by Blake Ferguson last week. He's out. Ken Seo will slot straight into there. Everything else remains the same. Again, my concern, Levi and Fitzgibbon on the bench. I'd like to see at least one of them in the starting side somewhere. But yeah, we'll scroll down to the Dragons lineup. The team selection here, if it does go through, and I can't see why it would change, from McGregor is the equivalent of a half playing with his eyes up. Everything is opportunistic, and you're playing the cards that are dealt in front of you, not playing ideal situations, or almost preempting situations. So you've had Matt Duffy, who had a screamer on debut last week, tried his guts out. You've had Ewan Aitken, who's been in and out with injury, the poor bastard. It's such a shame to see him come straight back into the side, score 2 tries, and ended up dislocating that shoulder, so he's out. But they've just slotted Josh Dugan in at that centre now, so he'll go in at right centre. I really, really like that move. It would have been quite easy, and you would have been quite justified to put the bloke who's played one whenever he's been available back there, and then, you know, maybe put a Tane Milne or someone in there, and then, or maybe a Kurt Mann. But instead, McGregor's stuck to his guns. He's left the kid to back up and showed a bit of faith in him, which is only going to make him play better again. Josh Dugan is more than capable of playing at centre. He's played there at State of Origin level and Australian level. So, you know, the fact that you're playing against Peter Mataudia, I think that's a big mismatch. So that's where I'm looking at. If they can get Dugan one-on-one with Mataudia, he's going to have more success than he's going to have failures. You amplify that with the offload that Dugan can have, and I hope he does utilise it, because when he has played centre, we've seen at that rep level, you know, Ferguson didn't see a lot of ball. So if I'm Nene McDonald, I'm saying, brother, don't just, as soon as you get that ball, don't tuck that ball under the wing. I want to see that ball being promoted and playing to that edges. So yeah, that's going to be an interesting little battle on that edge. But I think the big mismatch there is Dugan and Mataudia. We can't ignore the performance of Gareth Widdop last week. The attacking flair and just the control that he has on this team, but just the maturity and, I guess, you know, C average performances that Josh McCrone provides. He's not going to, like you said, he's not going to lose you a game. So having him there just brings that stability, and I think that's what's bringing out the growth in Widdop's game that we haven't seen whilst he's been at the Dragons since moving from the Storm. And this forward pack, you know, look at that. Armel, Vaughan, Frizzell, Thompson's back, DeBellin, and that keeps the likes of Sims and Packer coming off the bench, and the X Factor in Kurt Mann. This team on paper, it looks unreal. Again, it's been a question of a lot of teams throughout the season. Paper means shit. So, you know, the Knights have had the capability to go out and put points on the Dragons. So if they can wipe that out of their mind, you know, perhaps there is room to make this tight. But for me, I think last week against Manly is going to be a massive boost of confidence, as long as they don't go in there like they did last time. And I think they'll learn a lot from last hit out, and I think they'll go and put them away quite comfortably. So I'm tipping the Dragons 13+. Rabbitohs Raiders, this one could really go either way. There's been a shit ton of changes made by Coach Maguire. So finally, I've been saying it for weeks, that Sutton shouldn't be playing 6. Would I go with this combination of Johnson at 1 and Walker at 6? Look, I don't know. I don't know who else you play at 6 if you're not going to play Sutton at 6. So for me, I guess it's just an opportunity for Cody Walker to get his hands on the ball more, which I don't think is ever a bad thing, especially when you desperately need wins. Braden Burns is out of the side, and we see a bit of a reshuffle. So Hymel Hunt comes into the team, Robert Jennings gets pushed out onto the wing, and Tyrell Fuimaono comes into the centre, unlike his back row position in the past. So that's where Sutton goes back to that back row. So there's been a massive amount of changes. Damien Cook finds himself in the starting side, with Robbie Farah relegated back to the bench. So heaps of stuff going on there. Burgess and Tyrrell remain up front, and Crichton and Sam Burgess remain unchanged in their respective positions. So if we look at this bench, though, it's a little bit smaller. I mean, yes, George Burgess is a massive human, but you've got Farah, Cam Murray, and Cole Turner. It'll be interesting to see if that bench stays the same. And if it does, that indicates to me that Maguire wants to play a bit more of a flat and fast game, especially moving Walker to 6, and then you've got Sutton that's going to punch on those edges, as well as Crichton on those edges, and then you've got Sam Burgess who can float up. We've seen him score plenty of tries on those edges, showing up in that triangle shape that you push at the line. So if that bench stays the same, they're going to go with the flat and fast approach. But then if we have a look at the Raiders, again, overarching consistency with the 17 that starts. The changes yet again, so we still have, beg your pardon, Papali out through suspension, and now Jordan Rapana and Sia Soliola join that list. So 3 out suspended, but aside from that, everything else remains the same. So Michael Oldfield will make his starting debut. He was on the bench last week, but didn't get any minutes, so that mid-season signing for the Raiders will be put into effect. So with that lack of combination now between Leilua and Oldfield, obviously this is going to be their first game together, the emphasis of Kotrick and Croker comes into play. So we're going to see a nice little matchup on their edges of Croker and Kotrick versus Fuimaono and Jennings, which is also a new combination. So it's almost a mismatch side to side. So whoever can sort of exploit those combinations a little bit better, especially around fifth play options and their kicking game. So if Reynolds can execute his kicking game, it's been a lot better in the last probably 4 to 6 weeks than it was earlier in the season. The Bunnies are a massive chance. But again, Caesars over the last 3 weeks has been generating a lot of momentum, repeat sets and whatnot. And, they were far from disappointing against the Storm last week, who were the competition leaders. But again, missing Smith and Slater throughout that game, they weren't able to get over the top. So they're my concerns. I like the fact that Hodgson is just going back to 9 now. They're not experimenting with him at lock and Baptiste starting at 9. I think that was a waste of time, essentially. But yeah, we see the big bodies on the bench, Priest, Dave Taylor and Jeff Lima. So they're going for the big bargey, up the guts mentality. So whoever can sort of execute at that greater level, I think we'll get the upper hand. So forward pack is really important. Fifth play option is really important in the kicking game from Caesar and Reynolds, respectively, from both sides. Sam Burgess is still under a bit of a doubt with the rib cartilage injury. There was no fractures there, but if anything, the cartilage is actually worse than any fractures. So, I think a lot hinges around that because obviously he gets a shit ton of work. But again, I would probably, if he doesn't play, I'd expect probably someone like Zane Musgrove to come into the 17. So a lot hinges there, but I'm sort of leaning towards the Raiders in 1 to 12. They've won 3 of their last 4 against the Bunnies. I think they've only played 3 games at ANZ Stadium in like the last 4 years or something, and 2 of those wins were against South. So I think the Raiders will learn from last week. They'll be motivated, and they'll really look to put all the bullshit of their several refereeing complaints. I think they just need to own the fact that they weren't the better team on the night, and move forward and put a solid performance on, because the Rabbitohs hold a similar position on the table as them, so they need to be winning these games. Alrighty, the Roosters and the Cowboys. This poses for me one of probably the most important game across the round, and it's not just because the Cowboys are the team that I support, but we see up the top there, Roosters $1.64 favourites into Cowboys $2.32. I think that is massive value for North Queensland, and I can see why they are the underdog. The Cowboys have a 6 from 19 record at Allianz Stadium, so it's far from impressive. But we've got to remember they're entering into uncharted waters now. They've won 4 in a row without Jonathan Thurston, something they've never been able to do. But one thing that gives me hope with these guys is they've continued to surprise week in, week out. And the new halves pairing of Tamari Martin and Michael Morgan hasn't seemed to really faze them at all. The transition has been quite seamless. And that comes off the back of performances from Bolton, Hess, and Taumalolo. And I mean, even blokes off the bench like Fensom, Ethan Lowe's performances on that right second row, and he's holding up quite soundly as a goal kicker as well in the absence of JT. We've got to remember that's another big factor that they're missing from their captain now. But the Roosters are missing a lot of firepower too. No Cordner, no Friend, no Gordon still. And I said it last week in the review. You probably haven't heard it now because, as I said, that the video got removed. But one thing that I alluded to, I didn't feel as though the 28-4 scoreline against Newcastle last week was super, super convincing. Mainly because it was based on a decision on that 60th minute. There was a knock-on, in my opinion, from Latrell Mitchell. I thought there was 2 in there, and they got away with it. Tupou goes and scores in the corner, and then they go on with a big momentum in the last quarter of the game. That's against a team that hasn't been able to play the last quarter of the game for pretty much the whole season. This Cowboys team, they're going to go the full 80. They played the full 80, and that's why they were able to capitalise on a loose ball and run the length of the field and seal a game against a desperate Warriors team. I think if they can get their short kicking game right, as Newcastle did in the first 10 minutes against Connor Watson, but hold the pressure on there, I think you're going to see all sorts of troubles for the Roosters. Victor Radley versus Jake Granville in the middle. I think Granville has really, really got to step up even more now. He's been playing fantastically, But he's got to go out there and intimidate this kid by showing him how to play 9. Get out, challenge him, and just pretty much throw down a gauntlet to say, hey, are you going to return fire here? Because we've seen a pretty reserved, debut. Again, an absolute youngster, not holding any grudges against him for just doing his job, getting some good quality service to his halves. But if you want to go up and above through adversity, you've got to have the confidence straight away. We're seeing now that these kids are coming out and putting performances on from day dot. So he needs to step up there and really have a crack at Jake Granville does Victor Radley. Obviously, there's a whole heap of potential still with the outside backs of the Roosters. Tupou Mitchell, Joe Manu comes back in and Blake Ferguson is there. However, defensively, where I think they really can exploit the Roosters is through Ryan Madison and Luke Keary. If they can generate some time and space and potentially even get Cohen Hess once he comes on the field in that roving role that he does in the middle and shows up on either side of the edge, I really think he could wreak some havoc. If they can get any opportunities where they get him one-on-one with Luke Keary, good fucking night. You are not stopping him. Again, forwards need to start really, really well. Asiata and Bolton need to absolutely take it to Maria Hargraves and Napa if they're any chance. Because there's still some big bodies that are coming off the bench to replenish those stocks. Tedavano, Takiyaho, and the experience of Aiden Guerra is not going to run astray. So yeah, we go down and have a look at this Cowboys lineup. So Antonio Winterstein is set to come back after that little niggle. So Javid Bowen will drop out of the side. So that leaves a little bit of a mismatch on these edges. I'm really looking forward to Kyle Felton, Tupou going at it all night. Both big bodies, both score amazing tries. So it'll be interesting to see if both teams still try and exploit those two guys and just put them head to head, or if they lean more towards this mismatch in height of Winterstein over Ferguson. If Pearce can get his kicking game right, I think Ferguson could have a field day and play all over Winterstein. So it's going to be up to Kane Linnett to work double overtime in his defensive roles through kicks. So they're sort of the key areas where I think the game's going to be won and lost. The battles of the 9, the wingers on the mismatches, the accuracy of the kicking games, and basically who can just hold in that tussle and continue to bring more off the bench. And for me, having it'll be interesting to see. I've seen Sean Fenton was carrying a bit of an injury last week, so there's a couple of blokes there that could potentially get a start. Braden Ueli may come into the team. We'll just have to wait and see, but I think the more minutes again that we can keep milking out of Jake Granville and keeping Ben Hampton on the bench, the further that the Cowboys will go in this game. So for me, I don't know if it's just because I'm being biased, but I honestly believe that the Cowboys can win this one. I think it could go down as an absolute thriller. I believe it was a 1-point ball game last time these sides came together. I could be wrong on that, but that's what my instincts tell me, and I think it could go somewhere similar again. Perhaps maybe I'm thinking of the Roosters and the Storm earlier in the year, but yeah, the Cowboys to win -12. That's one of my upsets this week. Storm Manly. Again, I think this is another big game, and for me, the result hinges on whether or not this man right here, Cameron Smith, plays or not. He's under injury cloud with that pectoral strain. And one thing we do know for certain that Billy Slater has been ruled out. So for the foreseeable future, Cameron Munster has been named at 9, and they've gone back to the starting combination for the season with Riley Jacks named at 6 to partner Cooper Cronk in the halves. If Smith isn't there, for me, that weights things too far. Simply because, let's just have a look who's coming back in for Manly. Coruscant, Green, Lawrence, Matthew Wright, and Lewis Brown. That's why they got fucking pumped last week, is because they had no Coruscant or no Green. With those guys back, and if Smith's out, it's going to be interesting to see what they do. Whether they just try and slot Slade Griffin straight in there, whether they start him off the bench and perhaps put Riley Jacks in some sort of role, where they drop Jacks back to the bench and start Griffin. It'll be interesting to see Nate Miles come up against his former club pretty early. I think this is only his third start for Melbourne, so he'll get out there and want to prove himself. But that's not to write off the Melbourne Storm, and any team that has a Munster, and as well as the finishing capabilities of Vunivalu and Addo Carr is going to go a long way to winning a game. That's why they're the top of the table. But yeah, I think losing Smith and Slater in a double whammy, and the fact that Riley Jacks hasn't played first grade in a number of weeks, it's going to be interesting to see which way they lean. Whether or not Jerome Hughes might even sneak his way in there. There's so many ways that Bellamy could look to plug these holes. Excuse me. But for me, I really like all those additions for Manly. I can't see them putting out a performance like that again with that much strike power coming back. Blake Green's just going to add that stability for DCE in the halves. Matt Wright brings that, not only the height factor back and the experience, so that just alleviates that little mismatch that they had last week with Brad Parker playing first grade. Brent Lawrence up front is going to bring a whole heap. As long as Marty Tapau gets back to his running game, that's where he sort of went astray last week. So yeah, I really like the look of Manly. Whether or not I'd even change my tip should Smith play, I'm not too sure. The Storm got away with a 30-26 win earlier in the season, but I know the Storm are always hard to beat at home. Sunday Arvo footy, it's going to be a cracker, but yeah, I think at what do we got? $2.35. I think Manly are great odds. So a Cowboys Manly head-to-head multi, I think could be on the cards. Finally, we have. I'll just pull up the right screen if I can. There we go. The Tigers and the Titans. This one's being played on the Gold Coast. So these guys came together only in round 16, so only just over a month ago. And the Titans won 26 points to 14. It's honestly a flip of a coin. A big loss in Conrad Hurrell with that hamstring injury. But Carl Lawton comes back as a replacement 9 for the Titans after Pat Politoni's been doing that job for a number of weeks now. There's a lot to like, but John Olive defensively, I think that's an interesting decision to have him at centre. He was pretty poor when he played on the wing against Souths a number of weeks ago, and I believe it was Alex Johnson that beat him, with no space one-on-one. It might have been Bryson Goodwin actually, but that's a little bit of a concern for me. That's the one that's got me sitting on the fence. We've seen, conversely, one change of position for the Sharks against the Titans, and the Titans won by 20 points. So, that one change can actually have that much influence on a game, especially at NRL level. So that's the big question mark that I have defensively. If John Olive can stand up, they'll go a long way to winning this game, simply because of, you look at the spine. Hayne, Tyrone Roberts, Ash Taylor, Nathan Peets. It's all class. Not to mention the front row standard of Wallace and James, Kevin Proctor, Greenwood and Max King are making a fist of their starting opportunities now, very much hitting a groove. And you've got some big bodies coming off the bench too. Morgan Boyle, Pulu, and Nathan Petteroo. So yeah, it's really a flip of a coin. West Tigers have got Chris Lawrence into the back row. Elijah Taylor slots into the back row from lock, and Eisenhuth will get a start. So I don't believe he started yet in his 4 NRL games. You've got some big bodies there for the Tigers. Alex Twal, Suaso Sue. Michael Cheekham really impressed me in the game against Parramatta last week. I thought he brought a lot of energy and intent. And Sia Manafanai remains on the bench with Tim Grant starting in the front row alongside Aaron Woods. So, if either team fires, they've got strike power all across the park. Like 1 to 5, Tedesco, Norfoluma, Asan Masters, Nguama, and Martin Zalesniak, they can finish. If Lola here gets his running game going, if Luke Brooks' kicking game is sound, if Aaron Woods and McKilrick hold that middle up and get probing, Aaron Woods is playing very similar to what a James Graham did of a number of seasons ago with that ball playing responsibilities. There's a lot to like from both teams. It's just who's going to fire on the day. You honestly just don't know. It's the frustrating part of following these two sides throughout the season. They've just been so inconsistent. But I guess you look at the track record. The Tigers were super disappointing last week, not to get a win over a high error count from Parramatta. The Titans had the game in the balance against an informed Penrith, and once Moylan took that intercept, it just deflated the tyres of the Gold Coast. So you look at that, they're very much in a contest with a super competitive side in the NRL at the moment in Penrith, and they absolutely destroyed the Sharks the week before, although they were missing James Maloney. But they did so in atrocious conditions, and I think that's something, to score 30 points in those sorts of conditions, you can't be complaining about that. It's just with those last couple of starts that has been leaning towards the Titans. They've just probably know how to win a bit more than what the Tigers do this season. They've had that taste, and Ash Taylor, I think he'll revel in the opportunity to play over the top of Luke Brooks. So for me, and the fact that they've already beaten them this season, I think they could even sneak out to not a massive 13+ victory, but enough, that they might win by, maybe 14 or 16 points. So for me, I think that the Titans will get the cookies in that one. And that, my friends, wraps up Footy Rants for another week. I will see you at the start of next week, where hopefully the review will be all good to go. So bear with me and we'll see where we're at. Thanks, guys. Catches.